Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very last Woodhull Censorship Series program of 2024. I'm your host, Mandy Sally, also the Chief Operating Officer here at the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. And for this very special, very last program of the year, I am joined by Woodhull's fearless leader, President and CEO Risqué Levy. She is going to be helping me moderate our discussion today, and we're going to chat a little bit about what things have looked like for the censorship of sexual freedom in 2024, what Woodhull's been working on, and what we're going to be thinking about for next year. So, this is a little different than our usual program. If some of you are returning, we're so glad to have you back. And I want to let you know that this is not our usual panel discussion. We are going to be joined by some returners to the censorship series. These are folks that Woodhull works with consistently throughout the year and folks we consider to be allies in this work in fighting against censorship, defending free expression, and defending our First Amendment right to free speech. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. Before we get to that, I will do our usual housekeeping. Please feel free to use the Zoom chat. Would love to hear your thoughts and feelings or questions as we get into it with our panelists today. That Zoom chat is usually pretty active during these conversations. So please exercise your free speech and tell us what you're thinking in the Zoom chat. I also want to let you know this will go on Woodhull's YouTube page once we finish our recording today. So don't worry if you can't stay with us the whole time. You can watch this back at a later date. And we'd love if you also shared this with your friends and family. It stays on YouTube forever, and please share it widely. I will also be sending a follow-up email with links and resources mentioned by our panelists today. I'll do my best to drop those in the Zoom chat as we're talking about them as well. But don't worry about saving them because I will be sending it your way. Last but certainly not least, the censorship series, is actually celebrating its 2-year anniversary at the end of this month. We've now produced 23 of these programs, and while they are free for you all to listen and learn, they are not free to produce. So if you've learned something, if you felt inspired or fired up or taken action based on something you learned in a censorship series program, please make a donation. You can head on over to woodhullfoundation.org/donate to make that donation. I will link in the chat as well to make it easier for folks today. Something really exciting about donations we receive this month is that they're doubled. So all donations we receive through December 31st, 2024 are doubled up to $15,000. So your donation actually counts twice. We'd really appreciate it if you could give today. So, enough of the housekeeping. Let's get into it. Before I bring on our guests, Risqué, I want to chat with you a little bit about, what our challenges were this year. What were the opportunities that we saw related to the censorship of sexual freedom in 2024? What are you thinking about as we prepare to conclude the year and get ready for 2025?
Ooh, what am I thinking about? Well, there's Risqué, the private citizen person, who's thinking about a lot of things. And there's Risqué, the president and CEO of the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. And I'm thinking about the past year, the sweep of age verification laws across the country. I'm thinking about the increase in book bans. I'm thinking about the issues around personal liberty, the restrictions on personal liberty. I'm thinking about what we're facing in the next 4 years of this new administration. And I'm thinking about what Woodhull will continue to do coming into 2025 and beyond. Neither list is manageable. They're both massive, my personal list and my Woodhull list. And really, after 21 years of leading Woodhull, I think they're probably close to the same list. What are you thinking about?
Well, right now I'm thinking about, are you sleeping if you're thinking about that many things all of the
Not
time?
a lot now.
um, Yeah, well, as I reflect on 2024, and I was thinking about this as I was prepping our outline for today, so much of my time here at Woodhull was spent thinking about age verification last year.
Right.
And, Mike and I in our conversation later on in this program talk a lot about age verification. But, I spent a lot of time in the spring when most of the states are in session sending letters and tracking legislation related to age verification. There was so much of that introduced at the state level this year. But in addition to age verification, which when we talk about age verification, we're talking specifically about legislation that forces consumers to present some sort of ID or biometric identification to access, a quote unquote adult or explicit website. There was also a ton of legislation around social media and just general internet use for folks who are minors. And while Woodhull advocates specifically for adults, folks who are 18 and up and their sexual freedom, we very much recognize that any sort of general ban on access to the internet for anyone is an accessibility issue. It's a free speech issue. And at a time in our country when so many of the issues that Woodhull fights for, LGBTQ rights, bodily autonomy, free expression, so many of those things are under attack, particularly by our new administration. I spent a lot of time looking at these bills that are attempting to ban, anybody under 16 from social media and saying, like, hey, that's a huge problem. The information that people can find online related to these issues is so crucial, particularly if you live in a state with an abortion ban, or a state that doesn't have comprehensive sex education, or a state that's trying to ban gender affirming care. The internet is such an important place to find those resources. And so, in addition to age verification, there was a lot of legislation around those issues that Woodhull spent a fair amount of time commenting on. Here in my home state of New York, we submitted comments during the rulemaking period for New York's um, ban on this kind of stuff. So I did a little bit of work in California as well. So it's been busy. It has been a busy year, and so much of what we've been focused on is really those free speech issues related to the internet.
We submitted testimony in 18 hearings. Is that right? This past year? Do I have
Uh,
the number right?
I think it's 17. It's like between testimonies and letters. Yeah, it was a lot of different states, everything from Alaska to New York to Kansas. I mean, we were kind of all over the place. Thank goodness
Right.
for the internet, right?
Right. And, we have a unique voice at Woodhull because the foundation of our work is human rights.
Mhm.
And so I can't think of another phrase. I'm just going to use the dog phrase. We don't specifically have a dog in most of the fights. We're not a reproductive justice organization. We're a human rights organization. We're not an LGBTQ plus organization. We're a human rights organization.
Mhm.
It's the fact that our work centers on our fundamental human right to sexual freedom. And that is a broad, broad, broad umbrella that
Mhm.
all of these other identities and communities come under, that give us a unique voice and that puts so many of these issues front and center on our agendas. And we've been doing this since 2021. So I'm sorry, we've been doing this since 2003. It's
Which is
21
21
years.
years.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've given up caffeine. So
Oof, that's talk about a real struggle.
I know I can't imagine, but I've done it. So yay me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yay me. What
Uh,
do you think?
she says as she drinks her coffee.
Yes, I was, when I asked you what you were thinking, I thought you're probably thinking I should have gotten coffee first, but you did.
Always come prepared.
Always prepared.
Yeah.
What does Woodhull do? So I was thinking about that. Yes, 17 or 18 pieces of testimony. We're going to the Supreme Court in January, in fact, on January 15th, to support the fight to eliminate the age verification laws in Texas. In fact, that's on our website, and I'm sure Mandy will include the link. One of the things that we do, and one of the roles that I think are really awesome for us, is that we're educators. And, a perfect example is the Woodhull virtual programming, the censoring of sexual freedom. Another example is one of our programs we do in collaboration with New Moon Network, and that's Spokes Hub. That's for people who are or have been in the sex trade. And we teach advocacy and all kinds of social issues. And what's unique about that program is that thanks to the generosity of New Moon Network, when people graduate the academy, they are eligible for cash awards when they speak to the media, when they publish a piece. And that's what I think a lot of the work of Woodhull and other organizations will be moving into the next 4 years, and that's to educate and to build collaborations and to actually give the tools to the army of people we need on the ground and in the halls of Congress and in the state legislatures and in the neighborhoods and communities. And so that's one of the things I was thinking about while I wasn't sleeping.
Yeah. And at the end of our program today, Ricky, you and I are going to talk about moving forward and what's on our agenda in those early months of 2025. But you mentioned organizations and building coalition and building community. And so that's an excellent segue to take us to our very first guest. As I mentioned, everyone here today is a returner to the Censorship Series. These are folks that we work with pretty consistently, who are values aligned with Woodhull and working to protect free expression. And so to kick things off, we have India McKinney, who is the Director of Federal Affairs at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You mentioned our Supreme Court case in January. They were one of the folks who joined us in the amicus brief we submitted in that case. We love EFF. We do a lot of work with them. They actually were part of our FOSTA lawsuit as well. And so we go way back. And Woodhull spent a lot of time last year working to defeat the harmful legislation that India is going to speak about in her piece. So India is going to give us a broad overview of what's happening at the federal level with online censorship legislation. I love India's brain and the commentary she provides. So without further ado, let's hear from India. Welcome back, India. You are a returner to the Censorship Series, and very glad to have you and your expertise with us today. We're big fans, of course, of EFF. Woodhull and EFF have done lots of work together, and I hope we'll continue to do so. But today we're talking about what's happened in 2024. What do we see coming up in 2025? And so from where you're sitting at EFF, what have been the biggest censorship challenges in 2024, challenges and opportunities? Kind of, give us the highlights here today.
Yeah, so there's a lot that's happened in 2024. And I really want to emphasize up top that what's happened has been bipartisan. So there's a lot of, we had an election recently. It did not go the way that many people thought it was going to, both in each chamber of commerce as well as in the administration. So there's a lot of feelings around this. And when we're talking about censorship, it feels a little bit different when you're looking at the next 2 years of a Republican trifecta in Washington, D.C. But I do really, really, really want to emphasize that the efforts we've seen thus far have been bipartisan. One of the main sponsors of the Kids Online Safety Act, Senator Blumenthal, is a Democrat from Connecticut who's otherwise pretty liberal on a lot of issues. So this is not a Republican-Democrat dynamic. It's not even a liberal-conservative dynamic. There are people all over the place who are in favor of these things for various different reasons. And there's a lot of people who oppose them for various different reasons. There's actually fewer people who oppose. It's very easy to get behind the idea that bad people should not be able to speak online before you actually have to dive into how do you define bad, how do you define speak, and how do you control all of the levers that make that happen. So there's a lot that's been happening in that space, with the main underpinning idea is that we have a teen and preteen and young child mental health crisis in the United States. That's not something we're going to question. That's not something that I have the expertise to question. So let's accept that premise to be true. However, I do not think that the internet is the root cause of those issues. I don't even necessarily think that the internet exacerbates those issues in all of those cases. In all of the reports that we've seen from the CDC, from the APA, from even HHS, they don't come to the conclusion that the internet is the root cause, or even social media is the root cause. But a lot of people feel like it is, or they feel like it should be. And quite a lot of politics and policy is driven by what people feel should be true, even if the facts don't necessarily back that up. In politics, we don't let facts get in the way of what we want to do.
Of course not.
No. So Kids Online Safety Act and some other age verification issues. There's a lot of really concerned parents who really want to protect their kids. I think their hearts are in the right place. They want to protect their kids from eating disorders, from suicidal ideation, from other harmful content. And so the problem is, as a parent, how I would define harmful content for my children, who are very tiny, is not necessarily the same as what the government would define as harmful content, depending on who's in control of the government, or parents across the world. There is no universal standard for what is harmful content. Mm-hmm. So that's a problem when you start talking about legislation and who's allowed to access information, because it's who gets to decide what is harmful. Right. And that's first and foremost the problem. And then, can you define what is harmful? What does harm look like? And then you have to determine, you get to those things in the legislation, and then you get to the platform side. Even if we agree on what is harmful, even if we agree on the type of thing, like this is definitively harmful and therefore it should be taken down, from a platform level, how do you determine the difference between the actual harmful thing itself and people talking about the harmful thing, either because they have solutions, or they're doing advocacy, or they're doing outreach, or they're trying to raise awareness, or they're trying to do any of the other things that you do in order to provide mitigation efforts, to provide solutions to these very real, very problematic, critical issues that we're having. So when you're talking about eating disorders, there is, from a platform level, it's very hard to determine what is like a how-to guide on having an eating disorder versus somebody sharing their personal testimony about, I had an eating disorder, this is what it looked like, and this is how I found help, this is what I got help, here's where I am in my recovery. And one of the things we know about mental health is that feeling like you're not alone is an important part of that. And that is something that the internet is really, really good at. I'm having a problem. I'm not alone in having my problem. I can find community, and I can find, that's why AA and support groups and all of those other things are really proven to help. And online is a really great solution for a lot of those things. So even if we can determine what is categorically harmful all the time in every situation with no exceptions, which we can't, even if, how do we, from just a mechanical standpoint, how do the platforms know the difference between what we have all agreed is harmful and what is important and necessary speech talking about the harmful thing? Like, we've seen countless cases where, Facebook doesn't want to allow gratuitous violence on their site. Great, I don't want to see gratuitous violence. Sure. However, there is a difference between gratuitous violence and news reporting of what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Congo. All of that news reporting from the platform perspective looks really similar to gratuitous violence. And if the circumstances were different, it would be gratuitous violence. But it's a news event, not just straight up violence.
Right.
How is the platform supposed to know the difference? One of them is a problematic, deeply problematic, if they take down that content. The other one is probably okay. I would like to not see gratuitous violence. But when the platform makes those decisions and they get it wrong a lot, incentivizing them to take down more content in the name of protecting the children is just a recipe for disaster, in our view.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would agree here at Woodhull, and
that's why we're friends.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this harmful label is, of course, what is also applied to lots of sexuality content, which is really where Woodhull weighs into this debate, right? There's a lot of sex educators, sex therapists, folks just generally talking about relationships online who've been caught in this net, and their content has been labeled harmful when, truthfully, it's not, in similar ways to a lot of the topics you just discussed. So I really appreciate you laying that out for us. It's something we've been talking about for a long time, right? In fighting this legislation, in opposing COSA. One thing that did happen this year that is new is that COSA did pass the Senate. So that's unfortunate.
By a lot. Passed
yes.
it by a lot.
Yes.
That was a bad day.
Yeah, that was not wonderful. We'll see, right? It has not passed the House up until this point. We don't know what's going to happen from now to the end of the year or next year. But there was a little bit of momentum that was not in our favor this year.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, what are you thinking about in 2025? What are you looking for? What are you sort of anticipating on this front for, both going into a new presidential administration that, now has control of both houses? What's on your mind and EFF's kind of priorities as we head into 2025?
Well, I definitely expect COSA to come back. Again, it passed the Senate pretty overwhelmingly. Why wouldn't they reintroduce it? I expect it to come back. But I expect to see quite a lot of movement in both chambers about the idea of age verification. Whether or not it's specifically COSA, Senator Cruz, who is now going to be, I believe, I don't know that they've actually decided, but expected to be the chair of Senate Commerce. He's had an age verification bill that it's either an age verification or banning children under a certain age from accessing social media bill. And he's got the chair, he's got the gavel. So I expect to see movement on that. I expect to see similar movement of similar bills on the House. Meta is also now pushing, because they want to get this off of their plate. I'm seeing a push from Meta that the age verification piece should be really happening at the app stores and the Google Play. So in order to download an app, you have to have registered your government ID with either Apple or Google in order to download whatever game, whatever. And so then once you do that, you're in the clear to do whatever you want to do on the site, which I can see why Meta is pushing that. That gets them off the hook. There are also, again, 1,000 problems with that, both from a constitutional perspective, from a privacy perspective, and then also the will it actually work perspective. Because let me tell you, as a parent of a toddler, she doesn't have an app store account. We do. We're grown-ups. We're going to download whatever. And if she wants to, and again, like when we travel, we're going to put her mouse reading game on our iPad as well as her iPad.
Right.
Because if one dies, if there's a battery, if there's an issue. And so like I've downloaded it on my adult account. So if this mouse game starts spouting pornography or whatever, and I get mad about it, they're like, well, you did it on your account. You're a grown up. It's like, okay, but it just doesn't work. There's so many ways that you try to age gate things and platforms, and you assume when you're age gating it at that level that it's one device per person. And my toddler doesn't have her own devices that are exclusively for her use. Teenagers don't even necessarily have devices that are exclusively for one use. And even if a family shares the device between just the kids, you're going to have kids of a whole bunch of age ranges. And in quite a lot of places, you're going to have a shared device for much of the family. Or you're going to do exactly what we do, is the parents are going to log in with their account and they're going to download their stuff. And so what you're doing is you're restricting access to the kids that don't have access to a parent or a guardian, or you're giving parents or guardians more access to what their kids are looking at than is really necessarily a smart idea. You're making it more difficult for more vulnerable kids. You're not solving a problem. The government is now forcing Apple and Google to collect more personally identifiable information than they were before, which is contrary to the other thing that we're trying to do, which is get a consumer data privacy law passed. So anonymous browsing, anonymous downloading, anonymous access to information is really threatened by these types of ideas. And again, like if you actually do have one device per person, you'll be fine. But a lot of people just don't. And it's not going to work, and it's a bad idea. But I think that's what we're going to be doing in 2025.
Right. So, having these conversations with lawmakers, sounds like there's still quite an education gap between what they want to happen and what can actually happen from a technology perspective. And, many conversations will be had, I'm sure, as we go into the next year. And I will say to folks listening, I think that EFF puts out some of the best explainers for this kind of stuff. I'm often like, when I have to go prep for something, I'm like, all right, let me go to EFF's website. Let me read what they're saying about it, figure out how to make this all make sense, and keep educating folks about it. So appreciate the good work you all do. We will be continuing to watch and look out for it. And for folks who may be new to EFF, how do we find you all online? What's the best way to connect with EFF and your work?
Yeah, well, you can follow us on Blue Sky. You can also, so if you're interested in like the specific legislation things that we're doing, act.eff.org is where all of our action alerts, that's our contact your member of Congress tool. You can click through to all this stuff, but also we're really prolific. We write a lot of stuff. It's really good to hear that I write a lot of stuff. It's good to hear that somebody's actually looking at it. So EFF.org, we have our Deep Links blog, is everything that we are working on. Our litigation cases are there. My ramblings about what's happening in Congress are there. And our, we send out, you could sign up for, we call it Effector. It's a periodic newsletter that goes out that sort of has the highlights of all of the stuff that we're working on. But you can also sign up just to get the action alerts. And there's different ways that you can sign up. You can become an EFF member. I think it's $20 to become a member of EFF. We also have really cool swag. We have really cool stickers and t-shirts and hats. So just check us out. We've got a lot of really cool stuff going on, and we're not slowing down. There's quite a lot out there, and there's a lot to say. And so again, a lot of the things make sense once you spell it out. Like, it may seem like a good idea because, kids shouldn't access everything on the internet. Sure, that sounds great. All right, but how are you going to make that happen? And it's the implementation part that's challenging. And so it's really hard sometimes to be the one going to DC and saying, I think you should oppose the Kids Online Safety Act. And but it's an important thing to do. Somebody should be saying that, and it's us. So the more members that we have actually really help our cause. We currently have about 35,000 dues paying members, and that's a thing that I say when I go to DC. So if we can get more members, we can get more friends. It helps us speak with a little bit of a louder voice. So that's actually really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Strength in numbers.
Yes.
For sure. It is definitely important. So thank you so much, India. Thank you for your work and for taking a little bit of time to speak with us today. And, we'll be here continuing to do the work well into 2025 as well. So
and beyond.
Absolutely. Cool.
We're so proud to consider EFF one of our allies in this work. Thanks for that update, India. Woodhull is all about collaboration and strong alliances that make all the efforts even better and more powerful. Our next guest is one of those allies. This is Emma Shapiro at Don't Delete Art, where she's the editor-at-large. And this campaign that Emma's going to tell you about is a perfect example of collaboration. In this case, with another one of our allies, the National Coalition Against Censorship, Artists at Risk Connection, Free Muse, and various artists and activists across the country. Artists face challenges similar to those in the sexual freedom world when sharing their work online. DDA has been on the front lines fighting against the censorship of artists. Emma, welcome to the program, and would you tell us about your work and what you anticipate in 2025?
Emma, I'm so glad to have you here with us today. Thank you for coming back to the Censorship Series. I love when I have returning guests. You have continued to do great work with the Don't Delete Art campaign. I'm consistently impressed with everything I see you all doing on Instagram, and I love your newsletter. And I was wondering if you could share with our attendees, over the past year, what have been some of the challenges and opportunities for Don't Delete Art and the censorship of art and artists online?
Thank you so much, Mandy, for having me. This is such a pleasure to be able to connect. It's really important to us that Don't Delete Art is connecting with groups such as Woodhull. I think that we're fighting the same fight and we're on the right side of history here. So Don't Delete Art in 2024, we saw a lot of shifting ground for artists online, primarily from platforms continuing to respond to various international regulations like the EU's Digital Services Act. This has given artists and social media insight in terms of transparency requirements and into how and why their artwork was being actioned on. These regulations also required that they offer an appeal system, which we did see more broadly implemented. This marked a big difference from prior years when artists were subject to what was often referred to as the shadow ban, when their artwork would be downranked or otherwise obstructed without their ability to know how, why, or to appeal, which was extremely frustrating for many artists and other users, as you well know. So while this really did mark a positive shift or some decent changes into how content like artwork might be moderated, it also ended up producing a lot of frustration among artists online, particularly on Instagram, where artists were restricted by various moderation practices, such as limited reach, reduced visibility, and other restrictions on accounts. It's hard to know whether the moderation practices have become more stringent or whether the increased transparency was enlightening us to mistakes and misinterpretations of art online. So some of this may have also been due to how platforms are reacting to pressures from governments, society, which of course has resulted in chilling effects for freedom of expression online. On Instagram, where most of our cases take place in general, we have seen what appears to be more sloppy enforcement of these things, of Meta's rules, and artists feel like they have no recourse when appeals don't work. So we're getting a lot of artists contacting us about how confused they are, how they just don't understand why they keep ending up in these loops of violations. I guess in the past it felt a bit more cut and dry when they had less access to appeals processes and less access to information. So there's definitely a lot of frustration and confusion when they just feel like they're getting nowhere. So, for example, artists working with the human nude figure are continuing to feel pressure to change how they represent their artistic practice online. And artists have taken down everything from their accounts, archived all their images. Some artists have had their accounts removed, and a number of artists have tried moving to other platforms just out of sheer frustration. This year has also taught us a lot about the shifting and seemingly shrinking boundaries of the acceptable on social media, the acceptable kind of artwork. And we've been trying to connect to other groups to try to figure out how we can better protect artists online, trying to forge alliances. And we are looking forward to focusing our energy on advocating for artists online better by connecting with more groups who are confronting with these issues head on as well. As such, to help us understand these issues at hand and how we could plan our strategy, we've just launched a new Instagram artist account survey and report form for artists to show us what's happening inside their accounts and the kinds of violations and restrictions that they're receiving. So as we gather this important firsthand information, we will determine how we're going to use this data to get a better picture of the state of artistic censorship on Instagram in particular, and how to advise both artists and advocate for artistic freedom online, as other platforms are also trying to implement these in accordance to these new regulations. We had one wonderful thing that we were very happy to take part in this past year is that we contributed a report to the State of Artistic Freedom Free Muse 2024 report, which was the first time that Don't Delete Art had contributed a full essay about what the state of artistic freedom had been in 2023 into 2024. So we're grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome. I am going to link, if you have a link to that essay,
Yeah.
I'd love to share it, as well as the report form. You know, I think it sort of is like, when we know better, we can do better, right? And so folks who are experiencing this kind of online censorship of their artwork, I would encourage you to fill out this survey. You know, we need to be able to speak to the powers at be. I don't know. I'm not saying that right. But we need to be able to show the data of how this censorship is impacting artists. And it sounds like it was a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of the reporting and transparency from, you know, particularly Meta. I know on Woodhull's Instagram account, it is, I guess, refreshing to know they're actually doing what we thought they were doing, and it is somewhat easy to appeal. But then, you know, I think, as you alluded to, we get stuck in this loop with Meta where, like, every week or so, I'm going in, I'm checking, you know, does Woodhull have access to all the features on Instagram? Nope. Okay, time to appeal all over again. And it's a really frustrating experience. And it sounds like artists are having a similar experience to us.
Yes, definitely. And artists are getting a fatigue from it. Absolutely. Like, some artists are afraid to continue to hit that appeals button because it puts more scrutiny on their account, right? So if then you just stop appealing things, then you're just getting no visibility for sure. And you know it and you're very frustrated by it. So this new survey and forum that we've put out, it's really going to help give us a lot of insight into what's happening in these accounts, because only you know what's happening in your account. We can't see into it. So this will be very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you all are launching this and collecting that data. You know, we're going to continue to share it on Woodhull's page because we know how important that is. And so that sounds like one project that might stretch into the new year. But I'm also wondering, you know, what are some of the challenges and opportunities you're anticipating as we get ready to move into 2025, new presidential administration? You know, what's on your mind?
Well, you know, we're anticipating that with this change of government, there'd be single party, that might not bode well for nuanced understanding of art that tests the limit or explores themes that are already at risk for censorship. I mean, there was no guarantee that this was going to get better anyway, but we're going to definitely have to keep our eye out and be paying attention, I believe. Legislation that's affecting social media and internet that hadn't passed previously or that has been held up will probably most likely be passed, and that will affect a lot of things. So, you know, this will be something where we're going to be looking to collaborate with other groups. I'm glad that we started forging foundational relationships, because this will be something that'll be useful for all of us moving forward, for sure. We're going to be continuing to monitor these things to protect artists, and we'll continue to gather information. We're still gathering our OG report form on our website, which is not only for Instagram, it is for any events of suppression or censorship that happen online anywhere. Don't Delete Art isn't only about social media, though that was our original, our our original purpose, we have expanded to all of the internet. So artists who are experiencing any trouble selling their work online, having trouble with their newsletters or emails or whatever, we want to hear about that because these internet regulations will be affecting every corner of the internet and already have been, as we saw. So something else that has been very fascinating that we are interested in pursuing is that also because of the DSA, the Digital Services Act in the EU, there have been the implementation of third-party social media dispute settlement groups. So far there are 4 of them, and they deal with different platforms, maybe beyond social media as well, but it's primarily social media. And these are just separate dispute settlement groups where users can bring content moderation decisions that they disagree with to them, and they'll decide whether to take those cases or not. They will make a decision about whether that social media entity made the correct decision or not, and they will make that recommendation to that social media company or that platform. It's kind of like the way that the oversight board has worked with Meta up until now, but these are completely separate organizations. And their recommendations do hold weight because those kinds of decisions are decisions that artists can use to back up their arguments if they wanted to take it to court eventually in Europe, or if they wanted to have more ground to stand on from these independent legal services. This is an interesting development. It is only in the EU, but this kind of access and this kind of legal eye on these services and what's happening to users online will be something that we could certainly carry over into the United States and use equally powerfully potentially. And currently, since it's only parceled out into different social media companies or platforms, there is a possibility in the future that as this grows, maybe it'll be partitioned out into instead what the group is that's being affected. So for example, maybe there'll be a group that's dealing with artist complaints. Maybe there'll be a group that's dealing with hate speech or freedom of speech. So this is definitely an interesting development that we are in touch with some of these groups and we're looking forward to exploring further.
Yeah, I didn't know about that, but I love the idea of a independent body, right? Because I think so much of our frustration, from where we sit with folks who are sex educators or sex workers or dealing with sexuality in any way, shape, or form online, is you're stuck dealing with the entity that owns the platform, and it's this like constant push and pull. And if you're an independent sex educator, trying to take on Meta, this massive corporation, it can be really difficult. So I do sort of like this idea of an independent arbiter. Now, we never know how they might land, but I think it is helpful, at least the idea that there's somebody else kind of, with a different perspective looking at the situation.
Absolutely. Through these appeal processes within these platforms, the black box of these platforms, I mean, you have no idea what effect you're actually having or if they're actually even gathering data from your appeal. We can only take for granted what they tell us. So these third-party groups, it's like, even if now they don't quite understand what the implications are of certain content being downranked or being removed from the internet, for example, are using the human body or sexual health conversations. The more they see of it, the more they have the opportunity to learn, and you can bet that they're going to use that knowledge going forward. So this is a really interesting development for sure.
Yeah, it's encouraging. It definitely gives me a little bit of hope, which I always appreciate in doing this kind of work, and I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah,
for
sure.
So if folks, if this is their first time learning about Don't Delete Art and the amazing work you all do, obviously I am going to include links in the follow-up email and in the Zoom chat here. But how can folks reach you? What's the best way to get in touch if they're interested in your work, or if they need support, if they're an artist who's dealt with some online censorship?
Well, you can visit our website where we do have our report forms. We also have a gallery of art that's been censored online, as well as sign up for our newsletter, etc. So that is don't delete art. Sorry, www.don'tdelete.art. And we also have our Instagram account, which is very active, and that is, our handle is don'tdelete.art there as well. Or you can email us at deleteart@gmail.com. I did just open a Blue Sky account where, I want to be where the artists are, and a lot of our artists are starting to migrate over there, and let's try it out and see how it goes. But it's important for us to have a presence there as well, and that you can find us there at Don't Delete Art as well.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for this amazing info, Emma. And we'll certainly be watching to see how this all develops into the new year. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mandy. This is a privilege.
It's always great to hear from Emma and Don't Delete Art. We're really honored to be in collaboration with them. And next up, last but certainly not least, one of our strongest allies in the fight against censorship of sexual freedom is Mike Stabile. Mike is the Director of Public Policy at the Free Speech Coalition. We do a lot of work with FSC. And so take it away, Mike. Tell us what's been happening with age verification and the adult industry this year. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for returning to the Censorship Series. I see you all of the time, so this is kind of our routine, but for folks who are new or kind of just catching up with what's been happening in the censorship, adult entertainment, sexual expression world, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about what the highlights of 2024 have been. What are the challenges to the censorship challenges? What are the wins? Give us a little overview of what you've been working on this past year.
Yeah, highlights is a funny word, obviously, what's been going on. But I can talk to you about sort of the milestones or what we've been seeing. I think that particularly there are two things happening when we're talking about pornography or sexual expression. The first is that states for the past 2 years have really focused on passing age verification laws to make it hard for people to access the internet, specifically to access controversial content, sex-related content, and in the name of sort of protecting minors. And so what we've seen is that I think in the past year, we had 50 bills that were introduced at the state level, sometimes multiples in each state or variations around age verification. And those bills required that any site that had what was deemed, a certain percentage of material harmful to minors, which includes all sorts of sexual expression, needed to do age verification, which meant surveillance, right? Which means scanning your face, uploading your ID, doing a background check in order to be able to access this type of content. And that obviously scared a lot of people off, right? If you are asked when you're going to, a site that maybe it's a fetish site, maybe it's a, gay adult site, maybe it's sexually, frank information, you don't necessarily want that recorded, right? You want to preserve your anonymity on the internet. And I think that some of the legislators behind these bills sort of understood that. Like, we want to make it hard for people to get online. We want to make it hard for people to access this content. We think that this content should be banned, but because of the First Amendment, we can't. We're going to make it as difficult as possible. And we're going to use the excuse of minors can access this to limit it for everyone. Now, I think that there are also legislators, on both sides of the aisle that say, hey, listen, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's not appropriate for minors. And how do we handle this? And I think that these bills that were put forth often by faith-based groups seem to fit the bill, right? They seemed easy, right? You're going to check your ID at a gas station. If you're buying a Playboy or you're going to a liquor store, obviously this is the same thing. We're just bringing it online. And of course, those things are really different, right? As you know from the fact checks that Woodhull has been doing, it's much more complicated. There's much more opportunity for surveillance. There's much more opportunity to have that data sold or traded or monetized in some way. There's much more opportunity for the government to be able to use that data, right? To know more about you your sexual desires and all of that. So I think that, to go back, we saw these bills, we saw about 50 of them be introduced throughout the states. Total, maybe I think about 25 states introduced different bills, and about half were defeated and half passed. And so FSC has been engaged in legal challenges, most recently in Tennessee, over these bills, to say, hey, listen, this is a violation of the First Amendment rights, both of people who are speaking about sexual content online, and then also people who have a right to access it, right? Some of the plaintiffs in our cases are people who say, hey, listen, I want to access this. I'm an American. I have a right. This is protected by the First Amendment. I shouldn't have to risk my privacy in order to do it, right? I shouldn't have to worry that the government is watching me. So we have been engaged in those cases. We have filed cases in Texas, Tennessee, Montana, Indiana, Utah, Louisiana. I'm probably forgetting one or two, but it's been a lot, and it's really been illuminating, right? To go in and have those conversations with judges rather than politicians, and say, hey, listen, this is what the First Amendment protects, right? There's not an exception for adult content. We are covered for this. There are better ways to protect minors from accessing this content. So we've been doing a lot of having conversations with legislatures, conversations with judges, to help them understand that, like, listen, filters exist on your device. They are super effective. They're more effective than what these bills are pushing forward, and they don't carry any of the same risks that these bills do. Now, they don't discourage people from accessing adult content, which, again, that may be the sort of goal of these bills. But that's really what FSC has been working on, not exclusively, but it is really consumed a lot of our work. I mean, at the same time, the other stuff that we see going on, as I said, there's two things, right? There are these age verification bills being passed to protect minors from porn. At the same time, at the state level, what we see is the definition of porn radically expanding, right? So if you look at the debates over public libraries in conservative areas, if you look at curriculums or ideas of pride, they're all being termed obscene, right? They're being saying, hey, listen, this is pornography. This sex ed book is pornography. It might have illustrations about masturbation or about sex or about same-sex couples. And, conservative, often faith-based activists are saying that's pornography. We need to pull that out. And so I think that I always talk about these things in tandem, because on one hand, you have all these bills saying, hey, listen, we need to cut off large portions of the internet because minors might access it, because it's porn. And I think that everybody hears porn and they think, yeah, minors shouldn't access it, including us, right? FSC does not, we think there are better ways. We don't want minors on adult sites. But that's an easy conversation that is sort of bipartisan. We should protect minors from accessing porn. But you also have to realize that that definition of porn is being stretched to include almost anything that you can think of that falls outside of, a heterosexual monogamous marriage.
Yeah. And I think for where we sit at Woodhull, anytime I see that verbiage, material harmful to minors anywhere, it's like a red flag. There's like a siren going off, and I'm like, oh, what does that actually mean? Like, what are we really talking about here? I have huge concerns about that label being applied to things like reproductive care, abortion, LGBTQ stuff, sex education stuff. A big part of our work together in 2024 was collaborating with groups sort of outside of our usual sphere to send these letters to different state lawmakers and say, like, hey, what you're trying to do here has broad consequences, right? This is going to do a lot more than you think it is. And so I think, when I think about the highlights, yes, that is kind of a funny word, but I think one of the great things that we did together this year was come together with, about 25 or so other organizations and send these letters and, kind of show folks that we're not going to take this, right? Like, you can't just take away our human right to free expression, our First Amendment right to free speech, in the name of protecting children.
Yeah.
So
what people, we need to have the conversations with these legislators and with the community at large to understand that these are Trojan horses, right? Whether you're talking about COSA or age verification, right? They are ways of passing something through that seems really neutral and everybody should agree on it. And then you get into the details and the language is, the nipple of a female breast, or, the description of what is material harmful to minors, what is sexual. Think about the drag bans in libraries, right? This is sexual, it's sexualizing children. All of that language is pushed through under these seemingly, neutral bills.
Yeah. And it's, of course, not happening here in the US. And, we're not going to get into that. Not only happening here in the US, won't get into that in the program, but, I think legislators all over the world are trying to figure out how to make the internet a safer place. And often how that ends up, or what that ends up doing is causing more censorship, more surveillance, things we're trying to avoid. So there's something really big happening in January when it comes to age verification. My next question I've been asking everyone a part of this program is, what are you looking for in 2025? What are your priorities? And you've got something big right at the very beginning of 2025. So I'd love for you to tell us about what's happening in early January, and then kind of looking ahead at what other challenges you're anticipating next year.
Yeah, I mean, January 15th, FSC versus Paxton is being heard before the Supreme Court. That is an age verification bill that was passed in Texas and had, not just age verification, but, warning signs that had to be posted saying that, pornography, causes brain damage and child trafficking and all these sort of other sort of parade of horribles. So we FSC sued Attorney General Paxton, who was charged with enforcing that. That was sort of enjoined, has gone through the courts, and now we are before the Supreme Court in January. So that is a super, important case. I mean, it's being listed as one of the sort of top 3 cases this term because it's not just about adult content, right? It is about sort of this broader idea of what standards do we use to police the internet, and the First Amendment. So that will happen in January. I think that obviously that how that case turns out will have a significant effect on the rest of the calendar. But I think that, again, we're looking at another season of age verification bills. I think that the age verification bills in the states primarily were passed in deep red states, right? Over the past 2 years, right? What we saw was the Louisiana and Arkansas and Texas and, Utah and Alabama and things like that. I think that where we're likely to see the fight attempt to move, at least, is to, purple and blue states, right? It's easy if you have it's easier if you have a Republican dominated legislature get these through. You've got the ear, if faith-based groups were coming in and making this conversation, it's easier to do that. What we see, happening is, again, trying to take this sort of moral panic, this tech panic, this fear that everybody has over what is the internet raw, right? Like, this isn't just about kids. This isn't just about adult content. There is a cultural conversation happening about what things happening on the internet, what can they access. And that is everything from porn to Andrew Tate to, medical misinformation to, contraception, right? There's this idea that it is wild and woolly, and that's what the First Amendment is, right? Books are wild and woolly. Information is wild and woolly. Science is wild and woolly. It is all a potential threat. It is all potentially dangerous to people who believe one thing or another. And what has been, great about the First Amendment traditionally is that it allows for stuff that you don't like, right? As well as the stuff that you do like. And I think that for FSC, obviously, that's a larger conversation that we have with, obviously, groups like Woodhull and, EFF and CDT and, Fight for the Future and Don't Delete Art and Media Coalition and all of the FIRE, right? ACLU, all of these groups having this conversation about, and groups on the right too, who are maybe concerned about what censorship means online, right? It's one thing when another, administration is in power. I think that we want to have those conversations and say, hey, listen, the First Amendment protects speech that you hate, and that's why it's good, right? It protects speech that you want to censor, because it also means it protects you from people who want to censor you. And regardless of like who is in power, regardless of what the information is, we all have to fight against it. And I think that FSC, is making those conversations and having those conversations with a broad base of listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just mention Woodhull submitted an amicus brief in the case in January, along with our friends at Electronic Frontier Foundation. And thanks to Mojo Host for helping us do that. So, we'll see. Of course, we won't have a decision in that case until probably June, if we're lucky. But yeah, the arguments are coming up really soon. So thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be working with you in this fight and Free Speech Coalition. And, the work continues well into 2025. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. I really appreciate it, and obviously appreciate all of your help and Woodhull's help in this fight.
Sure. That was really great. I'm really so grateful to have the wisdom and insight from all three of our panelists. Thank you so much to India, Emma, and Mike for your time today. So glad to have you here with us and continue to be working with all of them and their organizations well into 2025. So, we talked a little bit at the top of our conversation today about things we've been thinking about from the past year, what Woodhull's been working on in 2024. But I also asked all of our guests today to tell us what they're thinking about in 2025. What's on the agenda for the start of the new year. And so, Ricky, I'd like for you and I to answer that same question. And I want you to kick us off here. What do you anticipate as the biggest challenges to free expression in early 2025? And what's Woodhull going to be focusing on in the new year?
Well, what do I see as the biggest challenges to free speech and sexual expression? If I look at Project 2025, everything is pretty well outlined in there. I think that anything deemed to be adult content is going to come under even more fire in 2025. I think that personal liberty, personal autonomy, your right to make the decisions about your body and your relationships, I think that that's going to come up in 2025 and beyond. We have a Supreme Court justice who's made no secret of the fact that he wants a case that will allow him to overturn Lawrence v. Texas, which will eliminate privacy and recriminalize sodomy. There's talk about overturning Obergefell, which would in turn make same-sex marriage no longer legal. As a matter of fact, we have a program coming up in January where we'll be talking extensively about the impact of what's coming down the pike for LGBTQ plus people. We'll be joined by Diana Adams for that program. I think if I can pull way back and say what I think one of the greatest challenges is, I think it's panic. I think that we do things when we're panicked that we would not do if we were able to step back and rationally think about what we're facing and what we might do about it. I think for organizations on our side of the aisle, there's so much to do. There are so many potential threats and so many already activated threats with limited resources.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ricky. Panic is definitely the go-to emotion. And I think there's a lot of strong feelings after the election. Rightfully so, right?
Right.
Woodhull, I just want to remind folks, is a nonpartisan organization. We are grounded in human rights. And so we will continue to work towards defending sexual freedom and our human rights. And I want to just kind of give folks a preview of coming attractions for what else is on our agenda coming in January. As I mentioned, the censorship series will return. We will be back in January, and I'm really looking forward to that. But we also are working on a new series of fact checks here at Woodhull, all about sex work and sex workers. And so look for some new fact check articles in the beginning of the new year. You know, we at Woodhull are proudly supportive of sex worker rights and the decriminalization of sex work. And so that series of fact checks very much works towards that goal. And we've talked a lot about the intersection of sex work and censorship here in this program. So that is coming up in January. You know, we are going to continue to fight age verification. We've already been meeting with our allies about what that will look like in the new year. You know, as Mike mentioned, there were 50 pieces of legislation related to age verification in 2024. I hope it's not that many in 2025, but you know, if it is, we're prepared to continue to speak out and speak up against it. So that's just a little bit of a preview of what Woodhull will be working on in early 2025. Is there anything I neglected to mention or forgot to tell our wonderful audience about?
I don't think so. Something new that we began this year, thanks to the amazing Mariah Grant, is policy statements and position statements. And we will continue that into 2025. It's a way of articulating Woodhull's position and the intersection of whatever the issue is and human rights in an easily digestible format that's ready to download or share or take in and talk to your legislators about. No, I think you covered everything else.
Yeah, I think we're going to be busy.
I think it's going to be quite a year.
Yeah. And folks, I hope that you will continue to tune into our programs. If you don't already, please follow us on social media at Woodhull Freedom. Subscribe to our newsletter, which I will drop in the chat as well as include in our follow-up email, because we're going to be continuing to do the work. So I mentioned our program in January. I neglected to mention that we'll be collaborating with our partners at LaShaw Institute. Very much looking forward to that. We're going to be having a conversation about sex tech and censorship in January. So that should be really interesting. That is going to take us to the end of our program today. You can, again, rewatch this on our YouTube page, as well as all of our other censorship series. They're saved in a playlist for you. We will be returning in 2025. These programs will remain free to watch. They will always have ASL interpretation. Thank you so much to our wonderful team of ASL interpreters. Couldn't do this without them. And to help us sustain the censorship series, we would really appreciate if you made a donation. The link is in the Zoom chat, but you can also head to woodhullfoundation.org/donate to make a donation. Remember, all donations received before the end of the year are doubled. So you're being extra, extra generous by giving to Woodhull today. Thank you so much for your support, and we will see you in 2025.
See you next year.